So today is the first episode of the Simply Connected podcast. I had the pleasure of chatting with Consult Red CEO Stu Griffin, had some really interesting insights on what's happened in the past in terms of broadband CPE, how we got to where we are today, and some very interesting thoughts about the future. So stay tuned for that one. Stu, thank you for joining me for episode 1, this momentous occasion.
Delighted to do it, mate.
So today we're going to be talking about the appification of broadband. Before we get into that, maybe just in a few words, who you are, what you do.
So I'm Stuart Griffin. I'm the CEO of Consult Red. I've been developing solutions for operators all my career actually, even before Consult Red. And we've seen a tremendous journey in the pay TV space, application there, and we can see, similar things happening in the broadband space, and really excited to go on that journey in a new area.
So, Consult Red, a word or a term you use quite a lot, or we use quite a lot, is the smart router. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can expand on that a little bit to start with.
Yeah, I mean, it's really this idea that for a long time people looked at the router as a fixed function device. Its job was pretty much to convert whatever the access network was into Wi-Fi, maybe Ethernet, and that's what it did. And it was just something that you bought off the shelf. And I think that there's a realization that the device has a lot more potential than that. Could play a much bigger role in the services that operators want to provide. But to do that, it's going to have to get a little bit smarter. I think that can be confused with the idea that it needs to get need a lot more resources and get a lot bigger, and some of that's true. But actually, nowadays you can make things smart in incredibly lean ways as well.
Okay. So it sounds a little bit like there's a transition, I guess, from where operators and telco providers have previously been provide the connectivity. They're kind of widening out what they provide to their users. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. I think we're seeing this incredible surge in connectivity at the moment. I think there's an awful lot of bigger and smaller operators that are laying a tremendous amount of fibre. It's pretty soon everyone's going to have, well, not everyone, but the vast majority are going to have the ability to get a gigabit, if not faster connection. And many homes are going to have a choice. That last mile is going to be covered by multiple operators. And at that point, it's, how do you differentiate yourself when you're a broadband provider? What are you going to do? Is saying you're faster than the next guy becomes a little bit meaningless once you get above 500 megabits. Everyone's got as much connectivity as they will need. So it's going to be on other attributes. One of those attributes could be price, but that's a race to the bottom. And a lot of these fiber operators and telcos, they've used a lot of finance, so there's expectations from their investors as well that they need to meet. And then the rest of it's going to have to be differentiated on your service. And there's a whole gamut of things you can do there. With your service, you can look at bundling, you can look at your customer service, but you can also start thinking about the quality of your service. How do I give the best quality user experience to the customer? Mm-hmm. And alongside that, you might also start thinking about value-added services. Are there value-added services that I can build on top of my just my connectivity service? And this is going to become the fertile area in the future for broadband operators. Is that differentiation area? The basic high-speed connectivity is becoming table stakes.
Yeah.
And then when you start thinking about those value-added services, it opens up a new area for the operator to think about, because a lot of value-added services can be delivered completely over the top, like a Netflix or um, an Alexa service or something, some sort of smart home there. So there's no need to involve the broadband operator at all. However, some services might be better delivered or in actual fact really need some involvement from the operator. So there's some network element that they could provide that would really help this. And if nothing else, the packaging and the bundling certainly would simplify it for the consumer. And one of the assets that operators have is the CPE. It's there, it's in the home, it's at the heart of the network. It's probably the only device in your home that really knows about and sees all the connectivity that's happening in that home. And that could be a platform for some additional services. And that's an area where the broadband operators are uniquely placed. They have a competitive advantage there compared to, say, an over-the-top operator.
Okay, so clearly operators are making this transition where they're being forced to add more value through other means. It's not good enough to just provide the fastest connection anymore. So how are they going about making that transition then to being a more of a service provider?
That's a really good question, and I think there's different solutions emerging out there. What we see is, you can see that there's some sort of proprietary solution providers out there, although still very much using standards, that are going to provide operators with with an end-to-end solution. So you get a CPE that's perhaps capable of delivering some extra smart home security, parental control, smart Wi-Fi, home working sort of services, and the back-end management, and it's all completely packaged up so that operators can embrace that. And that's, there's a segment of the market that's going to appeal to, because it's largely targeted at, say, smaller operators that just want a solution. Then what we can see is some of the larger operators are moving towards an open source approach. So they don't want a proprietary solution. They want something that is common, that is very standards based, and that they could potentially get from multiple different suppliers. And we see activities in Purple Foundation is a one area where operators are pooling their efforts in a kind of open source initiative to create that software, that common software that will be on the CPE. And RDK, we see similar activities happening there, and they've been doing it for a while to enable that as well. So there's different strategies out there. There's some proprietary ones, there's some open source ones, and what we also see is some of the OEMs are leaning into a mixture. So they'll maybe have a proprietary back end, but that they can sell with an open source solution. But the landscape is still emerging. There's it's not. Smart routers aren't the ubiquitous solution today. We see some deployments, they're coming, but that landscape is still evolving. What I think is, and it's challenging for the operators, because at the moment, one of the things that's holding them back is obviously their legacy. They've got an awful lot of devices already out there that aren't capable of taking these, and those devices have often come from lots of different OEMs, lots of different software. So even harmonizing that legacy is a big undertaking. So as I say, a range of solutions out there. The open source approach is almost a compromise. What we've seen in the past in other platforms is, very, very large operators may consider a full proprietary solution that they own and control. And that gives them absolute control, but it also means that they have all the cost.
Yeah.
And pretty much every large operator now has made the strategic decision they don't want to bear all that cost. They need to amortize that cost. And really, we talk about open source, and sometimes people envisage that that's about volunteer programmers doing some work in their spare time. Yes, that is part of open source, but actually, even when you look at some of the statistics now, the largely what open source has enabled, one of the huge successes of open source is it enables potentially competing, in fact, companies to collaborate on an asset and share the cost and amortize the cost of that asset that is non-strategic, but they both need. And that's really where Purple is. Purple is really a collaboration of like-minded operators and like-minded OEMs. Quite a large community that have decided that we're going to collaborate on a carrier-grade asset that we all want. We all want that platform. We're then going to build on that and build our own differentiations on top of that platform. And RDK, by the way, is exactly the same model. It's exactly the same model. But they're pooling their investments to get that platform. What do they sacrifice for that? Well, no one operator has got complete control over that stack, but what they will get is a certain amount of influence, and the cost will be hugely reduced, and it's something that they'll probably see that after the initial investment, once the OEMs embrace it, there's a good chance that it's something that they will be able to then benefit from in the open market.
So just, I guess, talking about operators and the benefits for different types of operators. I mean, you have obviously different sizes and scale. You've got the likes of Sky, you've got the likes of Virgin Media. These have been around a long time, really focused on building a good user experience. You've got those that don't have the same size and scale of the likes of these larger operators, so tier 2s and 3s. And then you've also got these kind of up-and-comers, the overbuilders, build lots of fiber, and smaller operators now coming in the mix as well. What does, talking about these open source platforms, does this open the door for some of those that have previously maybe not had the capability or the budget that might come with developing your own software stack, and they might just have had to take what's off the shelf? Does that open the door in some way for these smaller operators now to deliver the same kind of experience as larger operators?
I think when you look at Purple and RDK, I think they're actually incredibly good news if you're a small operator. The market is a little bit nascent, but the large operators are putting most of the investment in between them, carrying a lot of the heavy load. But what they're going to create is a standard-based solutions that's going to be available from lots of different providers in the market. And that is something, it's going to take a little bit of time, but that is something that smaller operators can essentially tap into that equivalent technology that the larger operators, and align with that technology and align with those standards without making anything like the same level of investment. So I think that's going to be, that's always the benefit of open source. It is that openness that comes with it. And I think that's terrific news if you're a smaller operator.
Okay, so I guess moving on then from the pre-integration, operators get to a point of, okay, we now have an open source stack that runs on our across our devices. The kinds of apps and services that they're looking to deliver to their platforms. Do you have a view of, what do you expect to see on today, the kind of apps and services that these operators are looking to deliver?
That's really interesting, and again, that's an area which is growing. Alongside the platform being built, we're also beginning to see an app ecosystem emerging. And those of us that are familiar with smartphones and any app ecosystem, Windows, all of these things, we know ultimately the value will be in the app ecosystem. It's quite early days, but what we are seeing is certainly security players are leaning in to provide a very holistic security solution. Actually, when you think about it, the benefits of having a sophisticated security solution actually inside the router are really large because it gets to see all your network traffic, and it can spot that some rogue IoT device has been hacked and is now beaconing, and it can isolate it, and it can tell you, it can do something about that. It'd be very difficult for you to otherwise know that had happened, or do anything about it. So there's a whole world of additional security management that you can bring to the customer, and a lot of these providers are then obviously combining it with what they can bring to your laptop and your phone, maybe with parental control as well, so you get a nice holistic solution. So that's one area. Smart Wi-Fi, as we know, is another area where different providers out there, but giving people that high quality whole home experience is important. Another area is going to be home working. I think enabling VPNs, home working environments, that prioritization of traffic and apps around that. Another area likely, as we're seeing a lot of people in there are putting Zigbee and other radios in their CPU. So smart home, that's kind of leaning into Matter as well, and where that goes to smart home feels like it's going to be another area of potential applications. But smart home is quite interesting at the moment because today there seems to be, I think it's going to take a bit longer to emerge because it really struggles with standardization. But today what we see is so many hubs. It's really complicated. It's for people to engage with it, and it could be harmonized. The whole, from start to finish, from walking into the house with a fresh piece of kit to being able to control it, could be made incredibly simple if you had the right service and the right technology. And the router's got a role to play in doing that. It can onboard it straight away. You don't have to have a hub. Forget that, whatever it is, hub that you might have had. And then the whole service can appear in a single operator app and give you a much more convenient experience. But obviously there's other issues to consider there, such as portability, etc., etc. But I think, there's a tempt. I think perhaps one of the biggest benefits that operators are going to get is just driving the quality of the experience. Those small increments to the user interface, those small fixes, being able to run diagnostics, very detailed diagnostics that you can quickly download, being able to roll out quick updates, driving that quality of experience by not having a fixed function device that perhaps gives you very limited telemetry, isn't telling you about the Wi-Fi, how it working there. Having that ability to evolve that, update it, do it quickly, lightly, and that will drive the quality of the experience. And we know from our experience in paid TV, if you drive the quality of the experience and you can drive your NPS up, then you can really begin to protect your ARPU. There's many studies on this, but there's a really strong correlation between a really high NPS and then not seeing a jump in churn when you raise ARPU. So keeping that in, so that quality of experience has a tangible financial benefit for operators, and this gives them the platform to maintain that quality of experience. So although you've got the killer apps or the apps you might put on top of it, the new value-added services, perhaps the killer app is just driving the quality of experience.
Okay, so actually it's rather than here's what in the TV space or the mobile space, even there's been certain applications which have been deemed as killer apps on their own, and they don't enhance the overall experience of how the user interacts with that device, but keeps them engaging with that device. I guess what you're saying here is that from a broadband perspective, it's different. You don't need to actively engage with that device, but what you need to make sure is that what that device provides you in terms of your reliable connectivity in the home, it does that actually without you needing to interfere with it at all. So and you made a really good point there about the NPS. So there's a link between providing a good service and increasing your NPS, which makes sense, right? You keep your customers happy by providing a good service, and then they're happier.
People will pay more for a better service, or at least will accept a pay rise, an increase, much more likely if they're getting a good service. If they're getting a terrible service and you put the price up, they're on you switch.
That's interesting, because what I was interested to talk about is how you go about increasing output. Then there's certain apps and services that increase that, but actually some of those, what might be seen as from a user, they're not exciting apps from a user perspective. It's not providing an exciting experience, but it's providing a reliable, good experience, and that's the thing really that needs to happen in order to keep them happy from your broadband CPU.
Yeah, and I think also, you can make the service a bit more sticky as well, and therefore reduce your churn. Once you've got these extra services, and maybe you've got a great home working service, maybe it works brilliantly with your corporate VPN, and you have you've got a work SSID that gives you that seamless VPN experience and that quality of traffic when the rest of the house are doing something. You just think, well, I work at home a lot. This works incredibly well. It's a great service. You're less inclined to churn. So I think there's that's also an element of this.
Okay, so we've got to the point. Look, we've transitioned from the box in the corner of the room that provides you internet connection and a very basic web UI. We've come a long way since then, even to now. We've now got this running on open source software. We can add these, enhance the experiences through other services now. That's the position we're in today. So they are focused really on making sure that your devices are secure. So it's about the cybersecurity. It's about reliability of what's going on in your home, making sure your connection is not interrupted, and it's prioritized accordingly. So certain services for that. Do you see any, and maybe you answered it before, in terms of other kind of applications and services? You touched a little bit on smart home. Do you see that, where you talked about having a hub, like a Philips Hue, for example, have these hubs that control the devices? Can you see that disappearing at some point, and this is all managed in the
100%? I think there's great scope for all of that to disappear and become an app. I don't see why. If we can get the standardization right, we see what's happening in USP. It's already got extensions for Zigbee and Thread and what have you, and what are needed there. Now we see what we've got with LCM coming, and the ability to have the relevant app, the relevant device that's going to translate from, that can talk to the devices and then translate that and talk to the back end. 100%. They all need to disappear, and that there needs to be an appification there. I think when does that take off? Well, probably when these routers are a little bit more ubiquitous, but also when there's standardization so that these apps are portable. So that if I move provider, change my router, everything still works as it used to. It's a bit like when I get a new phone, all the Android apps keep working, or all the iPhone apps keep working. So we need to kind of get there. So I think it's going to take a bit of time. I think it's going to be one of the later use cases to arrive. But also, I think that use case will get more interesting, because we think of smart home often from a convenience aspect, and that's a huge part of it. But I think there's other aspects that are going to come in over time, and some of that's going to be energy management. As we all want more efficient homes, a lot more of our devices will start connecting to our home networks, and we want to collate that information, perhaps control that information and monitor that information, perhaps share that information with some provider that's helping us manage our energy to keep our costs down. There's real savings for the user there. And what we see with some of the more, innovative energy providers like Octopus is that demand-driven pricing, is available today in a very unsophisticated way. If I turn that off, if I use less energy at a certain time, I can get a discount. They kind of do that today, but that can be taken to a new level so that the consumer sees direct financial benefit. But they're going to need, you're going to need that ability to control things and know what's going on and know where that energy is being used and manage it. But that's as I say, that's probably even further out.
Okay, so we talked about so the killer app feels like it's a combination of how those apps work together to keep the end user happy, keep them connected reliably. In a broadband context, and in terms of CPE, what do you see, maybe not as a killer app, but enhancing some of those existing use cases? Do you see AI playing a part in being able to contribute there?
I think in some of the simple use cases initially, I think AI will be incredibly useful for those of us developing it, and probably incredibly useful in the back end for analyzing that usage data and seeing how people are using those services and how best to optimize them. Probably in an embedded sense, not being used hugely in those very early use cases. However, quite quickly, in security use cases, I can see AI playing an incredibly useful role. That extra ability to spot patterns, that's something that can adapt, that thing that understands how you normally use your stuff so that it spots when something strange is happening. I'm 100% sure that's going to happen. I think a lot of that's already happening in the cloud, but doing that in the privacy of someone's home, having that AI in the box, that's going to, and also then you get to do it at packet speed as well. So you can really, really enhance security. So that's definitely an area. The other area, and again, is the privacy elements probably drive how much happens at the edge and how much happens in the cloud. I think is when we get to the smart home, that having a truly intelligent home that starts turning things on and off, knows what your usage pattern, something you can chat to and then say, will you do this when I do that? That will emerge as well. But some of that intelligence would be best placed in the home for that privacy thing. There's only, the more that we become dependent, the more we talk to these AIs, the more that they are around us and we're sharing our lives with them. I think that there's a point where we really have to start taking some of that privacy quite seriously. If you zoom out where we're going with these assistants to the next generation, my kids, they're probably going to have one of these wandering around with them their whole lives. It's going to know absolutely everything about them. So who do you want to share that with? And so I think early on we have to think about perhaps it's best to do some of that at the edge and keep it private.
So that's a good point, and I liked what you said there. It feels like we're kind of will transition from the smart home being a smart home, addition of AI turning it into an intelligent home, rather than telling it what you want it to do, and routines that you've pre-programmed and things like that actually learn from your behaviors. It's able to kind of, it can pick up on those routines and it can make adjustments accordingly, and to what you were saying before, improve the experience of how of that user, and therefore increasing NPS, and therefore retained ARPU or increased ARPU as well for the operator. So it's true then. So really, the operators really are widening out then beyond. They're not just providing a pipe for connectivity. They really are widening out into supporting some of these more advanced use cases.
Yeah, I mean, and for the operators, there's lots of different models here. In terms of how they might be engaging with that. Maybe for the smart home, I am largely getting the technology from someone else, but they are providing infrastructure, part of the hardware platform that I'm using, support and enablement. So there's, they've got a role to play in that value chain, which is going to help them can help them in an ARPU sense. Or maybe they've lent into that in the future and they've decided, well, we're going to do the whole service there.
Okay, and you were talking about the privacy and AI coming in and privacy being an important aspect of that. We have seen some OEMs start to put NPUs, neural processing units, into their chips now, which presumably allows for even more improved local AI use cases, edge AI use cases in the home as well. So I guess we're going to see that the impact of that in time as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to see. We're definitely going to see more NPUs going into edge devices, certainly edge platforms like that, and I think we're going to see a bit of a snowball as the use cases come along, and we go, okay, hang on a minute, we need more power there. with that capability will increase over time. I get the impression at the moment silicon vendors are dipping their toe in. Okay, can we use it as security applications? But as those applications come along that start exploiting it, I think it's just gonna increase.
So
And the interesting thing, the other thing is we're seeing is I think that I was particularly excited by the DeepSeek thing because I think it was incredible that they showed the level of functionality you could increase and how much you could reduce the inference compute. So like 7% of GPT. So the amount of capability as these two things are going to meet in the middle, and you can have very, very capable edge devices.
yeah, it's an exciting time. I think we're seeing these massive leaps, and I think those will be transferable to all industries, and broadband is definitely one of those. So okay, so we've kind of looked back, looked a little bit where we are now. So let's talk a little bit about tomorrow, what tomorrow might look like then, and look a little bit ahead. So now we're seeing, and in particular, let's start with the app ecosystem. So at the moment, operators are kind of curating an experience based on services and applications that will support the use cases that they want to support. There, in mobile and in TV, we have a very different experience with apps and services in that you can just go into an open app store, you can pick the apps you want, and you can build that as a user. Mm-hmm. Do you see anything like that translating into a broadband environment? So the capabilities there, you've got the capability to deliver apps, but in terms of that open app ecosystem, or like a Play Store for broadband devices, if you like, do you see that ever being a thing?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think from if you compare it to from an operator perspective, if you think about pay TV, it's always a curated app store, and actually there's good technical and commercial reasons that is how that is. In the mobile space, it's a fully open app store, but obviously there's certain there's only one company in each case, which is really is really in control there, which is really seeing the financial benefit of that. If I was to think in the future, I think for most operators it will be a curated app store. I think as the dominant or most popular apps emerge over time, they will all support them and they'll be portable. But I don't think the operators, because of the expectation of quality of service, and because it will be them that you phone when stuff doesn't work, that's what most people do. I think they will be reluctant to go a fully open route. I suspect if you opt out and say, hey, I want to use my own device, that we may see in the future fully open stores out there. So maybe I don't take my BT router and I decide I'm going to plug my own thing in, and I get the option then to link that to some kind of open app store. But the quid pro quo there is that I'm on my own. If those apps don't work, who do I phone? How do I get that to work?
Yeah, and it makes sense to what you said earlier on, actually, in that the whole point of having these value-added services means that the operator can curate that experience. That's how they differentiate now. So by having an open app store, they lose the ability to do that because that's in the hands of the user to build that, and it's not a curated, good quality experience.
Yeah, I mean, it might sound, if we actually look at the pay TV experience, the reality is that if you're on you take an Android device as the best example, thousands of apps, but you look at in any particular geography what people use, then by the time you've got to got through the top 20 apps, you're in 0.1%. There are a relatively small number of apps in any given geography that people are actually using and care about, and beyond that you've got a long tail of incredibly rarely used apps that or in the pay TV setting are probably better used on a different device, or people can alternatively use on a different device. I think the world for apps is not going to be quite as, and a lot of that's driven by games in that space, and we're not in games helping with the gaming experience, but that kind of proliferation's less likely in the broadband space. So I think we're going to be talking about a smaller app ecosystem, and probably again the same effect will apply, is that there will be in any given geography 20 dominant apps that you need to support, and the operator can say, okay, I can work with that and make sure that my customers get a really good quality of experience on and cover 99.9% of what they need. I think that's probably the way that will go. You always get that market of the open WRT. I want to roll my own, which I love, by the way. And some people are going to say, well, no, I'm going to buy my own router and I'm going to stick my own open source. I'm going to use this own open source app thing, and they'll have tremendous fun doing that. But it probably comes with a level of engagement that not every consumer is going to want.
And yeah, you alluded to it there. I guess there's two different channels, I guess, for which people will acquire their gateways. One will be they get just something given from the operator. That's very curated, part of that experience. There'll be those that maybe they say, oh, that's okay, but actually I want to go buy a retail router, which comes with certain functionality. Do you see a space there where that kind of more open ecosystem might see growth, or do you think that's still the same, that even those retailers will want to build an experience around some of those apps and services, but in a way that they own the curation of that experience?
Yeah, I know. I could see. I mean, it's all getting a bit hypothetical now, but you could imagine. Some of the big players could lean into this, right? So, for instance, Apple or Amazon could do their own router, and you'll get their set of apps, and you can put it on, and they'll use that as another platform for providing their home experience. So, and that could be purely a retail offering. So, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, interesting. So, yeah, speaking of hypothetical, let's get very hypothetical now.
It's how far in the future we go?
Yeah, it's crystal ball moment. So, I want you to look, let's say, 10 years in the future from today. We're seeing very fast pace of change at the minute.
Yeah.
What do you see, thinking about connectivity in the home and, the experience from a user perspective? Any thoughts on what that looks like in 10 years from now?
Well, I think the obvious thing to say is I've got more connectivity bandwidth than I know how to use. It's just there. I think that the quality of service is incredibly good, in terms of my Wi-Fi coverage around my home. Again, we're in a situation where that is kind of taken for granted, just works. Although that's my experience as a user. There's a lot of people doing a lot of work, monitoring a lot of things, and a lot of intelligent things going on to make that the experience. When I look at my service provider app that I'm looking at, there is a range of additional services that are available to me that I'm using. I have no idea that they do anything with my router as a consumer, by the way, but I have thought that their smart home package looks incredibly appealing, and maybe I've gone with that. I've got very sophisticated cyber security protecting my home network and all my individual devices, and in an incredibly joined up way that knows about me. And I've got, strong guarantees and probably regulation as well that are saying to these people they are keeping all my data super private. It's not opt-outs everywhere. I can keep my data private. I can keep it on the edge, and where it needs to be. I think AI is playing a massive role now in what we're doing. It's the way that we're interacting with technology is much more. It's going to be much more fluid. It's going to be less about staring at screens and pressing buttons. I won't get too far into the future, but we really are just generally talking to it in a relaxed, casual way. And it's not just, it is truly intelligent. It's not just doing what I tell it, it's anticipating what it is I'm going to need based on what it understands of my environment. I think Wi-Fi sensing has become pretty ubiquitous technology within routers now, and that's being used to learn more, to help the home assistants, help the smart home experience. Yeah, but I think that's about as far into the future as I can see.
So we've got this then. Just if I summarise what I think we're saying, you've got the level of sensing technology. So Wi-Fi sensing allows you to use technology that's there today. I guess it's just refining that to fit certain use cases. But that technology exists today. That really helps with smart home, security type use cases.
Yeah.
So now in the home, we've got this layer of sensing. You can see what's going on in the home using sensors that might be bought in. You might buy a sensor from a third-party company and then have the accompanying app for that. It can tell you what's going on in your home. You've got Wi-Fi sensing, which can do the same kind of thing. So it gives you another level of depth as to what's going on. You talked about kind of intelligence in the data that flows through the router. So you've also got this network layer of intelligence to tell you what's going on in the home. So actually that's a massive ability to be able to overlay AI on top of that. And actually the future looks very, very good for the intelligent home, I guess.
I mean, the whole smart edge thing is coming. I mean, we've been in a world for quite a long time where you have a sensor, maybe it's a camera, maybe it's a motion sensor, maybe it's Wi-Fi. And what it can do is it can tell you something happened. Now it's then up to the human to use their intelligence to interpret what happened. And then it's up to the human to decide what is an appropriate action. Those two things can now be done by AI. The AI can interpret what's happened when something happens. I think this has happened. I think someone fell over, or I think they've dropped a parcel off outside, so you need to know there's a parcel, or whatever it is. And then they can decide what is an appropriate action that should happen. Call you that there's a parcel outside, or maybe call your neighbour because you said, "Oh, if I get any parcels," your neighbour said they'll pick up whatever that action is. So the whole, it's a tremendous change from where we are today.
Exciting times.
I think that's incredibly exciting.
Okay, Stu, thank you for that. That's been really insightful. Thank you for taking the time. Lots to think about for the future of broadband.
Absolutely, I think it's incredibly exciting. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Excellent.